This next section about my Bullitt actually starts out with my '04 Competition Orange Terminator Cobra. I always wanted a Terminator, just like most people who are into Mustangs, and I went down in one day to Phoenix and back with my cousin in his black Bullitt, picked up the Cobra, and this is me driving it home, turning 29,000 to 30,000 miles. So the car was relatively low miles for a Competition Orange, definitely hard to find, and these cars are very valuable even to today. They've gone up even since I bought mine, but I did have to pay a lot overbook for this car. But the reason that I bring this car up is because my brother had given me some good advice. I wanted to supercharge the Bullitt, and he said, you know, if it's going to cost you $5 grand or more to do that, you should probably think about putting that money towards a Terminator. And that was really good advice, and I'm glad I took his advice. And he was right. I said, you know, that's probably a good idea. But there still was a part of me that wanted to supercharge this car. And my friend had a Vortex supercharger on his GT. It was a True Blue car as well. And he was upgrading to a different head unit, or something was going on with that car. And he offered to sell me the Vortex. And I really wanted it on the car, but the problem was the whole setup was different from a GT than a Bullitt. If you look at this picture, you can see how it's routed up to the plenum, and this is what the Bullitt kit looks like. Totally different. The head unit might be the same, but the rest of it was all different. And I contacted Vortec, and they weren't going to sell me the plumbing and all the other intake pieces separately. And so I told him that I wanted to buy it, but I couldn't. And it was going to be, you know, a few $1,000s anyway. And my brother had told me, just don't spend that kind of money on the car till you get a Terminator. And I also wanted to pay the Terminator off first before I did anything. But I always liked how the Vortec looked on the Bullitt. I love how you can keep the aluminum Bullitt intake manifold, and it just looked really tough in there with that supercharger and all the piping and everything. It looked awesome. But I did not go that route. One thing I don't like about the Vortec is that it's kind of like a turbo, and it peaks high with horsepower, but there's no instant torque like the Roots or twin screw superchargers, the positive displacement superchargers that the Terminators have. But speaking of Vortec Bullitt Mustangs, the car that I had known, the first Bullitt I ever rode in, one of my favorite cars, Bullitt 974, showed up to town again, and I was so excited to see the car again. And I have a whole story about this car, but even though it was all scratched up and messed up, it had low miles, but this was a Vortec car, and it was really cool to see the car, and it made me want to supercharge my Bullitt even more. But the owner didn't really care to talk to me very much. He was just kind of like, he didn't really care that I had a Bullitt too, and that mine was all built up and everything. And you know, he didn't put the supercharger on it. My friend who owned the car before had put the supercharger on it, but it did make me want to have a supercharger on my Bullitt, especially since I had a built engine and it was ready to go. And speaking of green Bullits, I was cruising around and I was with my cousin with his black Bullitt, and I came across a green Bullitt for sale here in town. It only had 5,000 miles on it. I have a story about this car as well, but it was cool to have black, blue, and green Bullits all together. I ended up test driving the car with my brother, and 5,000 miles was so nice to have on such a perfect car. We took it back to the spot where my friend had his original Bullitt, where I first saw a Bullitt right here in this driveway. And so the thought crossed my mind to sell my Bullitt and buy this one because it was like brand new. Like I said, 5,200 miles on it is all it had, and I really considered buying this car. But deep down I knew that my Bullitt was built up and I was ready to go have some more fun with it. Now, as far as superchargers go, of course that was the next thing I wanted to do. And I remember reading in 5.0 Mustang magazine, there was an article about the Tork Tech kit. This is the picture that was in the article. And you can see they are able to run a positive displacement style supercharger on the 2-valve or GT platform. And what I liked about that was I could use any supercharger from any '03, '04 Cobra that I could find. And that includes a Kenny Bell, VMP, Whipple, Bullitt Eaton, anything that you find on the used market for the '03, '04 Cobra, as far as superchargers go, you can use one of those on that kit. So I really like the idea. And I watched this video on YouTube where a guy had a Tork Tech kit on this '03 Mustang GT, and you can see on the steering wheel it has a Ford Racing Delete steering wheel. It has the Ford logo instead of the pony. And it sounded so good. You could hear that supercharger screaming. But if you look closely at this steering wheel that I'm talking about, that's very important for a reason. So this is an Airbag Delete. That is what Ford Racing sells. And if you look at the radio bezel, it's an interior upgrade package car for an '03 GT. Now the reason why that is so interesting is because I decided to look for Tork Tech kits for sale on Craigslist. And I did a search and I found somebody was selling an '03 GT in Phoenix, and they wanted like $6,000 for the car, and it had the Tork Tech kit on it. I wasn't looking for a car that had it already, but I was looking for someone selling the kit. So I thought to myself, now wait a minute, there probably can't be too many Tork Tech Mustang GTs out there, especially in Arizona. In Phoenix is where this one was for sale. And so I looked at the video of the Tork Tech car that I had shown you earlier, and I looked at other videos he had revving the car up with the Flowmaster exhaust on it, and I looked at the Arizona license plate, and I commented on the guy's video, and I said, "Are you in Phoenix by chance?" And he said, "Yeah, I am." And I said, "Are you selling your car right now?" And he said, "No, I sold it 6 months ago to some kid, you know." And I said, "Oh, really? Because I think it's for sale again." I questioned him if he had the airbag on his Mustang with the running pony or if it had the Ford logo on it. And he said, "Oh, it had the Ford logo on it." I always wondered why it had that. He said he did look at the car later when they were installing the Tork Tech kit, and he could see that there was some damage in the front end there. So we both came to the conclusion that the airbag had gone off and somebody had replaced it with the Ford one. So I sent him the Craigslist link, and he said, "Yep, sure enough, that's my car." He said, "The kid's selling it." He said, "I think he was a little bit scared when he bought that car because it was so powerful, and I didn't think he knew how to drive it." So we determined this was the car for sale, and he shared with me a whole bunch of pictures of when he installed the Tork Tech kit on the car. He actually paid a shop to do it. These are the pictures of the blower. It was actually a Stage 4 Bullitt Eaton that he had picked up, and he paid a shop for 24 hours of labor to install the kit on the car and get it dyno tuned, and they actually took way longer than that. He said he actually felt bad. It took them so long to install this kit on the car that he felt like they really lost money on the deal. And so this is the whole Tork Tech kit that he purchased, and this is when the shop was installing it on the car and everything, and it made 410 to the wheels when he had it dyno tuned. And so I started to get really excited. I thought, hey, if I bought this car and took the Tork Tech kit off and put it on my Bullitt, I'd be making way more than 400 of the wheels because that's what this guy was making. And so I talked with the seller, and he didn't want to negotiate very well on the price. I knew that I could buy the car for like $6,000, and I could take the kit off, put it on my car, return the other GT to stock and sell it, and maybe come out even, or maybe a little bit in the hole, but at least I would have a supercharger set up for my car. And I also didn't mind doing that because I knew that that GT did not have a built engine, but my Bullitt did, and the Bullitt needed the supercharger more than the other GT did. There's just more potential for me to buy it. So I kept an eye out, and the ad disappeared, but then I kept looking for Tork Tech, and a few months later all of a sudden the same car came up for sale, only this time it was $3,500. So I texted the guy and said, "Okay, what did you break?" And he said, "Yeah, there's a problem with the car." And I think the Craigslist ad said, "Car still runs but has a problem, 3,500 or something is what he was asking." And I said, "Okay, what'd you break?" And he said, "The boost does not kick in anymore." And I'm like, "How is that possible? It's a belt-driven supercharger, and as soon as you touch the throttle, it's gonna have boost. Like, what do you mean the boost doesn't kick in?" I could tell he didn't know what he was talking about. So I came to the realization that there could be something majorly wrong with the supercharger. Maybe it's locked up and it threw a belt because the pulley locked up and everything. I didn't know what I was really buying, but I decided that I could probably get the car for a good enough price that even if I returned the car to stock and took the Tork Tech kit off with a bad supercharger, I would still have a pretty good deal. So I told the previous owner guy about it, and he said, wow, that car is breathing through the bypass valve. He was even smarter at the time than I was because he knew all about this, and I looked up to him. And so he was like, yeah, I don't know what that kid did to it, but he messed it up. The kid had also had the car repainted, kind of a darker blue with purple in it. I did not like it at all. I wish he would have left it true blue, even if it was peeling paint. So that was something I didn't like about the car. It was a real cheap paint job. But anyway, I agreed with him on $3,000, and I would meet him in Arizona to get the car. Now I said, how about we meet halfway, maybe Kingman? That's about halfway for me. And he said, look, I can't travel very far. I can't leave the state because I'm on parole. So if you come get the car and you come all the way to Phoenix, I'll give it to you for like $3,000 even. I think we had agreed at like $3,300 earlier or something. And he said, okay, $3,000, you can buy the car. And so the reason I have the picture of my blue Mach 1 here is because I took this picture that day that I made the deal with him. I was at this nice Walmart. It was a little bit of a drive. My wife and I would like to go there, take the Mach 1 for a nice drive, and do some shopping at that newer Walmart. And while we were in that Walmart shopping, I was texting back and forth with the guy, and I agreed that I would go buy the car that night. Now, I had worked the night shift that day, and so I was already tired. I didn't have a lot of sleep, but it was the Thanksgiving weekend, and so I had time off of work. And I got my friend and my brother together, and I said, hey, if we go right now, we can drive all the way down there to Phoenix, we can get the car, we can bring it back, and we can still be home with our families for Thanksgiving without getting in trouble with our family and our wives and everything. And so it was kind of a difficult decision. We wanted to just take the Mustang and go and drive both Mustangs back, but I had no idea what would be wrong with this car, and so we thought we might as well take the Tahoe, and that way, if we have to, we could probably rent a trailer and get the car home. We didn't want to take a trailer with us all the way down there for no reason. And of course, it was one of those things where it just took forever to get out of town. You know, my brother or my friend had something they had to do first, and I got all the tools together. I got my floor jack, got everything I could think of, and we hit the road. This was over a 6-hour drive each way, and we were going to have to go through the night. And we finally got down there to Phoenix, and it was a lot of fun because it was the same trip that I took to go get my orange Terminator. But we drove all the way down there, and I tried to sleep in the car a little bit because I'd worked the night shift before, and I knew we were going to be driving back tired. And I was texting the guy on the way down there, and he said, oh, by the way, it doesn't have exhaust on it. And I'm like, what do you mean it doesn't have exhaust on it? He said, well, we wanted to change the clutch, so the exhaust was in the way, so we took a Sawzall and we cut the X-pipe off so we could get the transmission down. I'm like, are you kidding me? So the car's open headers basically for the whole drive home. And so we got down there, and the car looked pretty good. I drove it around the neighborhood just to make sure that it ran and drove fine, and it did. The clutch was really shaky, so he had put a new clutch in, but he didn't resurface the flywheel, so it had clutch chatter. And so we looked over the car, jacked it up, and noticed that the O2 sensors and the catback was all just hanging on the ground. And my brother had a great idea to take a ratchet strap and just ratchet the exhaust to the body and tie it up there. And so we did, and that worked out very well. So the car could drive, but it was going to be really loud and open headers. And it did have long tube headers on it actually. And my brother had to put his earbuds in for his iPhone and listen to music and just try to go the whole way home that way. He offered to drive it back while I tried to rest in the Tahoe while my friend drove the Tahoe back. And while we were at this gas station, we realized that he had put these aftermarket halo headlights in, and he didn't wire them upright, so it had no turn signals, and they were pointed like straight at the ground. So we took some paper towels and stuffed them underneath the headlight to point the headlight up good enough to see while we were driving. But it was a really fun trip. We stopped and ate at McDonald's, and while we were there in Phoenix, we saw a Terminator street racing another car. The Terminator had big tires on the back, slicks or radials or something, and it was just whooping on this other car, and it was so fun to watch. It was an Oxford white coupe, and I believe it even had a cowl hood on it. And so we drank monster drinks, and we got home, and it was so fun to get this GT next to my Bullitt. And so the plan was to drive the Bullitt for a little bit, but eventually put it away for a little while and get that other car taken care of. I needed to get the blower and everything off that other car, return it to stock, daily drive it for a little while until it sells, and once that car's sold, then it would be time to party and start tearing the Bullitt down. So I'd take it for a little drive before I put it away. So I drove it around a little. You could still see the number on the window. I took it racing up at those airport races, and then just daily drove it for a little while, and then I was finally ready to start going. So I pulled that GT into the back side yard, and I very carefully took everything out of it. The gauges, like the air fuel ratio gauge and the boost gauge, but they were all tied into the back of the cluster and wired in everything, so I had to disassemble everything and get that all taken care of and put back together right too. And then I started taking off the supercharger, which was the fun part. Started to unbolt it, and I documented everything I was doing so I knew exactly how to put it back on. So I had a friend come over. He helped me lift the whole supercharger system out of the car, and there we had it. It was really fun. It was really exciting. I got the booster pump out of the back of the car. I was going to need to carry that over too. And then I put the supercharger in my garage and just let it sit there. I covered up the ports, the inlets, everything where no rodents could get into it. I had to buy a stock intake manifold for the GT, and believe it or not, there were a lot of things I had to buy for this car to make it work, and even the throttle cable was from a Terminator, and I didn't know that till later, so I'm glad that I got all those parts off the car. Here's the intercooler pump, and even the shifter bezel was a little bit nicer as interior upgrade package, so I took that, took out all the gauges, and I looked at what wires were going where and where they had tapped into the gauges. Underneath the fuse panel there's some grounds and everything, and I would realize that, oh, I need a cold air intake now for the car, or even a stock one, but I couldn't find a stock one for sale anywhere nearby. There's just so many little things that I realized I needed to buy to return this car back to stock. And luckily the programmer from the guy who supercharged it was still in the trunk of the car, so I was able to flash the stock tune back on the car now. And I also had to go get the exhaust welded back, because if you remember, the previous owner had sawzalled it off so they could do a clutch, and so I got the exhaust welded on. I paid a lot of money to get this car running right again, and it ran fine, but it had a weird little stutter in the higher RPM range, and it seemed like it would go into like a limp mode. It really shut down when you try to give it gas, and I couldn't figure it out for a long time. And I was laying there doing everything underneath the car. It was cold at night. I was working on it. I even caught a cold actually rolling around on the cold cement trying to fix everything on there. I changed out the crank position sensor. I changed out the MAF. I changed everything out on that car. I tried changing out the O2 sensors, and I was on the right track there, but I didn't know it at the time. And I was underneath the car working out on it, and I was like, wait a minute. I remember my friend's GT had an issue. It was actually his '06 GT, newer body style, where his O2 sensors were swapped on the wrong banks, and it made it go into like a limp mode. And so I thought, well, I guess I can try that. I mean, I had already swapped out injectors, I had swapped out everything, and so this was kind of the last thing to do. And so I swapped the two front O2 sensors to the different banks, and sure enough, that fixed the car. It ran perfect after that. And so I'd go visit the Bullitt, pull it out, drive it around a little bit, get it running, enjoy it, and then put it away and back to working on the GT. Just little things that needed, tightening up some exhaust fittings or whatever, the EGR, You know, little things like that, changing the oil. And speaking of, it took me forever to change the oil. Look at this oil filter. I had to get huge, huge vice grips and crush that thing to get it off. And I had talked to the guy who put the Tork Tech kit on the car, and that was the oil filter he put on the car. So I know that the kid who had it hadn't changed the oil, but I did because I wanted the car to be right. That little bolt on the bottom of it was no use. It just stripped right off, and I had to crush that thing to get it off. And so I did that, and then just daily drove the car, and I was driving it to work and back. You can see still had the halos in it, and I'll get around to changing those out because I thought they were ugly. There's the EGR tubes I had to transfer over, and I did change the headlights. So here's where I did that, and I put some stock style ones in, and I thought it looked so much better. And so this car was a nice GT. It was a good daily driver. I even put Bullitt wheels on it for a little while and enjoyed driving it like that. It looked really good that way. It was a 5-speed. It was fun. It was a really good car for the time. I did buy it a proper Mustang running pony airbag, and the interior was really nice. In this picture you can see it has the smaller headrests. I had taken the smaller headrests out of my Mach 1 and I put the big headrests in the Mach 1 because these Mach 1s had the option of the interior upgrade package like some 0304 GTs, and they did not have the big headrests. So I took the big ones, these are out of that GT, and I put them in my Mach 1, and it looks so much better. Those seats deserve those bigger headrests. But you can see it had the IUP pedals. Everything in this car was really nice. The interior was in great shape. It was a nice car. It even had a MGW short throw shifter that I had taken out because I was going to sell it, but then I put it back in thinking that the next owner would really like it, and the guy who bought it didn't really even care. So he probably should have just kept that. So then I was able to list the car for sale, and I was able to sell it, and I basically broke even. I got basically the money that I put into the car back. I did put all my time and effort into this whole thing, so you don't get that back, but as far as the money goes, I did get basically all the money I had to spend to return the car to stock, have the exhaust welded, all that kind of stuff, the trip to Phoenix and back, so that worked out nicely. So now I went back up to visit the Bullitt and go get the car and start the project. It was good to see the Bullitt again, and in these pictures you can see where it's been sitting. It had the fabric softener sheets in it to keep the rodents away. It was just nice to see the car again. And in this picture you can see it has the interior upgrade package bezel in the center there. I had it in there for a little while, but I ended up taking it out because it just didn't seem to match the car very well. But now it was finally time to get the Bullitt out and start the teardown of the top end, the intake manifold, and swap the blower over. So I got it out and took it for a nice drive. Went for a really good drive around the lake that's nearby. It was just a really fun drive, and it was running so good. It was so nice to have all that power again and the cams and everything, and the car made plenty of power for then, but I did want to supercharge it, and I did want to make more power with it and have fun with it. So I had spent a lot of time going home and watching videos on supercharging cars, even though it didn't seem to have anything to do with a Tork Tech kit. I really enjoyed watching the Power Nation TV shows where they would supercharge a 3-valve GT or a Coyote, and it really put me in the mood to want to go out into the garage and wrench on my car. And so I'd watch those videos, I'd get excited, I'd go out and I'd slowly start doing things to the car. So here you can see I'm starting to take off the intake manifold. I had the car in the garage ready to go, put the hood on top of the car so it wouldn't be in the way or fall off. Then I was basically standing in the engine bay, getting in there, getting to every little thing that I had to get to. I removed the front bumper so I could make room for the heat exchanger and put the intercooler pump on. Luckily I had kept all the brackets for the heat exchanger, and the factory intercooler pump bracket that's off the Terminator was on the other car. I got that off. I had to remove the serpentine belt, and I was going to move the alternator, flip it around backwards. That's how the kit uses it. And then I was also going to piggyback onto the harmonic balancer or the crank pulley with this specific new lower. And this lower pulley is what would come with a Tork Tech kit, so I had to buy this new since the kid had run over the other one and left it in the road somewhere. And that was really expensive. It was like $400 for that thing. And looking back, I probably should have opted for the bigger one so that I could run more boost, because later I'll find out that I was only going to make 11 pounds of boost with this setup. Then I had to clearance the front of the block. You can see right there where the grinding marks are. That's where the new supercharger lower and everything was going to go, and it would interfere with that part of the block. So you have to grind that part down. It wasn't that big of a deal, but I just wanted to make sure that I didn't interfere with the water pump bolts. So here's a cool picture of the bridge. This is what makes it so that you can run two belts on this, going down to the balancer with the piggybacked one that I showed you earlier. And so this is the Tork Tech one. I cleaned it up real nice, and then I took off the intake manifold and dug deeper into the car. And then I got the manifold side on the Tork Tech kit all cleaned up and nice. This is where the Tork Tech kit lower intake manifold would meet the cylinder heads. So I got that all real nice, and it was already in pretty good shape. It didn't have a lot of miles on it. And then I had to swap over the throttle cable. So this is off of a Terminator Cobra. And then I decided to go ahead and put the Colder NGK plugs in, gapped them down. And in the middle of the block, there are these two bosses, these parts sticking up here. And those would interfere with where the lower intake manifold was going to go now, because it's so much deeper. So I actually had to grind those off. And so I cleaned up the heads, and then I put some masking tape over all the ports to make sure nothing got in there, and I had to grind those, and it was kind of scary because you go too far, you'll go into the block, and you'll ruin the bottom end. So I did get that done successfully, and I was very careful. So my brother came over and helped me lift the whole system into the car. We got it on there, and everything was looking pretty good. I did realize that the Bullitt's fuel rail was a little bit different, so I had to take one off a GT. If you look at the back of the fuel rails here, you can see that one hose is angled a lot sharper. The one that's on the top there is the Bullitt. You can see how it angles, and that's to accommodate the Bullitt intake manifold. So the Tork Tech kit would have interference with that, so I had to get the GT one so that it had enough room around the back. And speaking of fuel, I did buy Ford Racing 60-pound fuel injectors for this, so I'd have plenty of fuel as well. So then I decided to change the pulley out. It had a bigger 3.1 on it, and I switched it out to a smaller 2.76, and that was a really good thing to do because it would up the boost a lot more. Even though the lower could have been bigger, at least I had the smallest upper that I could get on there. And then I had to play around with the tensioners and reposition things. I changed the belt out because that smaller pulley needed a new one, so I got a new Gates belt that fit just right. And then the car was just starting to come together. It looked really good. I had all the tanks on there, the intercooler tank, and then I started drilling the brackets for the heat exchanger to go on, and I had to go through the bumper and everything. So it was just a lot of work getting it all plumbed and getting the brackets where they needed to be. And in this picture you can see that intercooler pump and bracket just like it would be on the Terminator. And so when I looked through my research of how the power for that intercooler pump was run, they had it tapped in on the other GT to this red wire. And the shop had done this, and so I didn't know what that red wire was for, and I was very curious to where they were getting power for that pump. And so luckily I had a whole extra GT wiring harness, and so I just slowly took that extra harness and I started cutting it back and cutting it back until I came up with this. And this is what that whole harness looked like when I got everything off of it and unraveled everything. And to my surprise, they had run the power to the ignition coil wire. So that little red wire that I showed you where they had tapped into, it splits several times after that, and it goes to all the ignition coils. And that really bothered me because I didn't want to tap into the main harness for the ignition. That was just not a good place in my opinion. So what I did was I did a lot of research, and I ran the power wire up through the fender well, through the glove box, and I tapped into the harness down by the shifter where the convertible top wire would be, because on the coupes the harness is the same and it has the provisions for a convertible top, and the plugs and everything are down there. And those wires do have key on power going to them. So by tapping into that wire, now every time I turn the key, the intercooler pump would go on. And that was nice because then I could hear it every time I went to start the car. I just cycle the key and I could hear the pump working, so I knew the pump was working. And I really liked that setup because then I could have it running in the staging lanes at the racetrack when the car's off. And on a Terminator, it doesn't run until the car's on or at a certain temperature. So in this case I would know when the pump was working, and I thought that was a lot better than the way it was on the Terminator. So then I just had to plug a couple ports and do some things on the engine bay, and then I had to get into doing some wiring. On the Tork Tech kit, they want you to relocate the IAT sensor, intake air temperature, since it doesn't have two like a Terminator would, so I had to extend the wires and put it on the lower intake manifold. But then I got some more things for the car to make it run better for this whole thing, and I know it'd be expensive, but I bought the car a complete Terminator fuel tank with dual pumps, and this whole setup is a lot better than the GT one. The tank is actually sumped in the middle, so the pumps always have gas and you don't dry sump. I did take the whole hat out and I did the PPRV delete, and to make sure to get the right submergible fuel line so it didn't deteriorate or anything, and had it all safety wired nicely in there. And I found out that the fuel pumps in this Terminator tank I'd bought were the SVT Focus pumps, and those are really good, and so I was happy about that. And then I just cleaned up the bottom, I got the tank back up and everything. And again, to be on the safe side, I went ahead and upgraded the FPDM to a black 306 unit, which is a lot better, and you can do that or run dual FPDMs. And so that's the fuel pump driver module. And the reason you have to upgrade that is because when you're running a Terminator tank with twin pumps and a boosted pump, it can overheat and not work right. And so if you remember, I did get the boosted pump out of the other car, so I wired that all up. And I also did a power wire upgrade, which is that pink wire there, and it goes all the way up to the junction box by the battery. I did have to repin the connector for the FPDM to make it work right and run the higher power wire to it. So it all looked really good once I got it in there, and it worked great. And so I had my tuner send me a startup file for a bass tune so the car would run, and this is the first time starting the car with the supercharger on it now. Man, how exciting. Got the car to start right up on the first try. Everything was great. No leaks. Everything just went the way I wanted it to. So I drove it nearby here to a gas station just down the street. And then I got the car back and started modifying the hood, because the hood's not going to fit anymore because the pulley is going to bump the bottom of the hood. So I took some measurements and I cut a hole in the hood, and that's underneath where the hood scoop would be, but not completely. So I was going to have to move the hood scoop forward to cover that hole, and I tried to make the hole not too big so that the scoop would cover it, and that worked out nicely. And you know, I lined it all up right and everything. But once you cut that hole and add the scoop, it left the old holes for the scoop. Hardware, you know, this is where the scoop used to be bolted down, and those holes were really ugly. And so I went to the hardware store and I tried to get some cool looking hardware to put in those holes and some nuts to run on the back side, but it just didn't really look right. I had it on there and they stuck out weird, and I'm just not a fabricator. And so I took them out and I just made it look good, and I actually put some tape on the bottom side so water wouldn't get in there. But that's kind of how the hood looked after that. So I actually wanted to get a stock hood to make it look like it should again, because I could have put a Cal hood on it, and I could have even put a 99 Cobra hood on it, because the 99 and 01 Cobra hood which was the same as most '03 and '04 V6 Mustangs had, unless they were the pony package. The 9901 '03-04 V6 hood was domed upward, so the supercharger pulley would have clearance on that hood. And I know some Tork Tech guys run that hood, and I did buy one of those hoods later just to have around. But something to know about the Tork Tech car that I had bought in Phoenix is it actually had the Tork Tech hood scoop, which looked like a GT hood scoop. It was elongated so it would cover the hole in the pulley, but I could have carried that scoop over, but the paint didn't match because the guy had repainted that car that uglier color, and that scoop itself was very wavy and bumpy, and it was not very good quality. It didn't look good at all, so I didn't really want to invest in painting it and transferring it over. But my brother had traveled somewhere for work, and he was coming back through Las Vegas, and I said, hey, can you stop at the pick-apart and see if they have any V6 hoods there? Because it's the same hood as the GT, just without the scoop. So if they had a really nice V6 hood, then I could buy that one and I could re-drill the holes for the scoop, and I could cut a new hole in that hood for the supercharger pulley and put the scoop on there, and it would look just right. And then I would have that hood repainted when the whole car was repainted. And this way, since it was a V6 hood that never had holes in it in the first place for a hood scoop, putting the scoop farther forward would be fine, and there would be no holes showing like there were now on the Bullitt's original hood. Because even if I painted the Bullitt's original hood later and filled those holes, you would always see little witness marks of where those holes were. And it wasn't true blue, but it was, I think, Atlantic blue from a 99 V6 or a 2000 V6. And I made a trip down to Vegas just to get that hood, so I had a clean, straight hood, so that I can modify it later and do that later down the road if I ever repainted the car. But for the meantime, that hood was just going to be in storage, so I put it in that other garage and I had it stored like this to make sure that nothing happened to it. So then I wanted to wire up all the new gauges, the boost gauge, everything, and it was a lot of work as well. There's this tiny little fitting, and this goes on the back of the boost line, and it pinches into the gauge somewhere, and it's like a crush sleeve where you can only use it once. And luckily I found one. I went to the hardware store and I found that fitting. It's so tiny, but that was just something involved in getting that gauge to work again. And the gauge pod that came on the other car mates to the back of the A-pillar on the inside of the car. And what's interesting is it's actually a different shape for '03 and '04. And so since the GT it came off was an '03, that gauge pod wouldn't work on my '01. So I carefully removed the A-pillar piece from my Mach 1 and I brought it down and switched it over so I could put that gauge pod on there, and I put the '01 nice one onto my '03 Mach 1. So that worked out nicely. So then I ran all the wires for the gauges and got them all nice, and then I had to go buy a bung for the X-pipe. So what you have to do is drill a hole in the X-pipe and have this bung welded in. So I took the car to an exhaust shop and they welded that bung into my X-pipe, and that's like an O2 sensor. It reads your air-fuel ratio for the AFR gauge, and so I had that all wired and plumbed nicely. And so the gauges looked really good in there, and now I felt like I could drive the car safely after I get it tuned, of course. And so now it was time to get ready for the dyno tune. So I changed the oil on the car, got some fresh Mobil 1 in there. I always run Mobil 1 synthetic 530. And then I just looked over the car and made sure everything was ready for this tune, because I wanted to make sure that there was nothing wrong with this at all. So I enjoyed just putting around the neighborhood in the car and realizing this car is really fast. You've got to be careful with this car now, because I mean, it could get away from you really easy. I had driven my brother's Whipple Terminator before, but nothing really crazy, and so I was telling myself, don't hurt yourself in this car. Be very careful. Now, something I did while I was waiting for the dyno tune was I ordered a new Stegmeyer plaque for the supercharger. The old one was all worn out and ugly, so I was able to get this new one from them, but to do that I had to send in the serial number that was on the bottom of the blower to prove that it was actually a Stegmeyer, and it was a stage 4 ported Stegmeyer supercharger. That number is engraved on the face of the blower on the bottom left side, if I remember correctly. And so I did that for under the hood dress up while I was waiting for the dyno tune. But anyway, car was ready for a tune, and that's where the next video will pick up. And I'm just really excited that the car had gotten to this point. As you can tell, this was a huge step for the Bullitt, and I'm just really excited about this. So stay tuned for the next video, and thanks for watching.